In the late 80s, Japanese game publisher Capcom decided to take a little-used genre and bring it into the big leagues. Their 1989 game, Sweet Home, is often considered the first true horror title in gaming history, and proved that there was a market for fear. So in the 90s, they decided to go all out and make a game with a global audience in mind, one that would perfectly encapsulate the old Haunted Mansion feel. The result was Resident Evil in 1996, an instant success that single-handedly named the category as survival horror. After 2.75 million units sold, Capcom knew they'd done it. The trick was to do it again. Shinji Mikami, the director of Resident Evil, switched gears and became producer on the sequel. He knew he had a tough job ahead of him since the audience would know what to expect now. So he made the bold choice of leaving his old characters behind and coming up with a new cast. After all, if you have a hero who's already survived a zombie attack, how scared could they be a second time? With the change in cast came the opportunity to shake up everything else. As opposed to the secluded mansion, Mikami wanted to bring fear to the real world. The setting was thus changed to a more urban environment with the hope of making even the safe and familiar setting of a city terrifying. Gameplay would undergo a shift too. One of the first Resident Evil's few drawbacks had been its clunky control scheme, which made combat next to impossible. So Mikami wanted to tighten up the controls a bit and make a more action-oriented game. This was tricky. If they empowered the player too much, it wouldn't be scary. To add to the problem, the sequel's director, Hideki Kamiya, didn't particularly like horror that much. He was more of an action director. Convincing him to make his characters underpowered and helpless was going to be tricky. The crew was juggling a lot of competing ideas and philosophies, and in the end, it proved to be too much. Mikami took a hard look at the game in February 1997, just 2 months before it was supposed to release. There were a lot of good ideas, but they just didn't cohere into a game that Mikami was proud of. So he went to his higher-ups at Capcom and asked the impossible. He wanted to start over. The game was practically finished. They'd already released boatloads of screenshots, fans were clamoring for the sequel, money and time had been spent, and he wanted to start over. But Capcom did the unthinkable. They agreed. Against all business logic, Capcom just put their faith in Mikami. He'd made them one huge success. They just trusted that he could do it again. Mikami got back to work and the team started nearly from scratch. Fans, already rabid, went into a frenzy when they learned they'd have to wait a whole nother year before they could reside with more evil. When Resident Evil 2 finally released in January 1998, it had gigantic expectations to live up to. Fortunately, even after all this time, it blew players away. The new small-town America setting was a perfect fit with the game's creepy tone. Everything was more interactive, from the pre-rendered backgrounds to the character choices. Each character went on a different journey, and on the gamer's second playthrough, he'd find that things he'd done in the first playthrough actually affected his second. All of this was wrapped up in better graphics and smoother animations. But at the end of the day, what Resident Evil 2 absolutely nailed was the atmosphere. Fans ate it up, and the game's buzz was so good that there were quite a few new converts to the franchise. It was once again exclusive to the PS1 initially, though it was later ported to various other consoles. Resident Evil 2 went on to sell 5 million units worldwide, nearly double what the first game had sold, and the first game had been a smash. It was one of the biggest hits in Capcom's entire history. Their gamble to scrap the game completely and start over from square one had paid off. Big time. After his successful stint as producer, it was time for Mikami to head back into the director's chair. The survival horror genre that Capcom had named was proving to be a massive success, and yet only a handful of competing titles were in the market. They realized that they had the opportunity to start a whole new horror franchise without oversaturating the genre. So Mikami got to work on making a brand new series. Perhaps it isn't surprising that the end result didn't look too different from Resident Evil, fixed cameras and all. But there was one major difference. What's scarier than zombies? Dinosaurs, that's what. Dino Crisis released for the PS1 in July 1999 and went on to sell 2.4 million copies. Another smash hit and further proof that Shinji Mikami was made out of solid gold. Capcom's horror division seemed to be on top of the world. So confident were they in their series that after Resident Evil 2, they began work on not one, but 3 new games in the franchise. But complications from both the business and the creative side would end up causing havoc on all 3 of them. Tune in next time to see how Resident Evil evolved into the 6th console generation.